in your body that identifies the levels of energy. And once you exhaust those units of energy, it signals a certain receptor in your brain that say like, hey, body needs to rest. And this is where you start feeling sleepy and it's like, oh, I want to like take a nap or things like that. Or you're like, I feel tired, literally. And so the coffee molecule, it looks very much like that other molecule that reaches for the receptor to kind of block it or excite it, I guess. And to let body know that it's tired. But instead, coffee just blocks it, so your body literally cannot read, like, am I tired? Or am I full of energy? So it's like, well, since it's not exciting that receptor, I must be full of energy. And it's how it reacts. And it takes, I think, for half a serving, it takes about 4 hours to be out of your system. So a full serving of coffee or caffeine, I think it's similar with tea and matcha, therefore. It takes about 8 hours, one serving, to get out of your system. So you kind of ride that wave of I'm full of energy, for a while. And this is why it wasn't in conjunction. The interview was about sleep and problems.
I don't understand. You're saying it doesn't provide any energy. It just makes you not feel tired.
The funniest thing is that there's nothing in our body to detect caffeine, to react to caffeine per se. Like, there are no receptors in our body that receive like, oh, that's caffeine, identified as caffeine. It actually acts as something else and creates that effect.
Oh, you're saying it triggers another receptor. It simulates something else. It triggers a receptor eventually, right?
So the caffeine
or it never
molecule,
triggers any receptors.
It doesn't. It actually blocks the receptor.
It's an inhibitor.
It's an inhibitor. It's not an inhibitor. It's again, because if it's an inhibitor, it's kind of somehow it blocks the receptor of
serotonin.
No, that reacts. I don't know the right pronunciation in English. Adenosine. So it blocks that receptor who reads and it's things like, that's why he doesn't know, or he or she brain, the body doesn't know if he or she is tired. And because there is no
adenosine receptor,
there is no active stimulation. I'm tired. It's like, well, I guess I'm full of energy.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that adenosine the same that comes from adenosine triphosphate, the one that makes energy with the ATP cycle?
Right. So the ATPs, I think once you run out of ATPs or go low, that that the receptor starts getting receiving information that, hey, body needs to restore the energy, right? Once you start running low on ATP,
adenosine triphosphate.
But is there also an ATF?
The alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
That's what my thought was.
Yeah.
No.
There is. We always hope they don't show up. Yeah.
In the Navy, we've got anti-terrorism force.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Nothing with ATF. Do you want them to come by?
So the interview was in Russian. That's why I'm trying to kind of translate everything, and I'm not sure about certain terms because I don't know them in English. Yeah, but or how
that could be. I mean, I'm definitely not a.
As far as I researched, no, the ATP is the only one I found. But anyway, that was so fascinating to me. It's like, we're all like, oh yeah, caffeine gives me energy. I feel like so like, it fills me, makes me feel tonus and everything. Like I was like, there's
it's
nothing.
Just blocking
there's
tired.
nothing, just nothing.
It's like when you find out there is no darkness, it's not a thing. There just is light or not.
All right.
Yeah, I for me, it's not so much that I drink caffeine because I believe it gives me energy. It's more of the ritual of my day. Mm-hmm. Like it starts off, and because it's not always coffee, that's just kind of what I gravitate to most naturally. I like the actual taste of coffee. I don't drink coffee with milk and sugar or anything like that. I just drink coffee. But it's a routine that I'm used to where I know once I wake up and I get out of bed and I have a cup of coffee in my hand or hot tea, if that's the thing for the morning or whatever the case might be, like now my day has started and I am getting into productive mode. There's a routine that flows with it. It could be decaf coffee and I would still be okay.
Right.
I understand that my day is starting.
I'm the same. Yeah, I'm the same. It's more like a ritual. Mm-hmm. Like, and it's a part of that integration of me from my resting state into an active state. I think it's time.
Yeah, it's time. Let's introduce Austin. So Austin is the campaign manager for Jimmy Peluso, and he's speaking with us today about topics from Jacksonville to DC, and also, coffee and the things that we like to do with our day. So we can see your the viewers in the comments if you're on Twitch. We are live on YouTube, Kick, and Facebook as well now. But on Twitch, we'll see your comments live. So if you have questions, you can put them there, and we'll try to answer them. So welcome, Austin. I'm Bill. This is Alexandra. We are two Floridians who regularly, once a week, harass people with our random questions. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Maybe tell us a little bit about your position, how you became the campaign manager for Jimmy, and what exactly that means. Do you have to keep him under wraps? Keep him in line?
Yeah, that's the simplest way to put it. No, I mean, it was a quick, I say quick, it was about 8 years in total that culminated to his race in particular, but I had started getting into politics and the issues that faced our city whenever I was in 6th grade. And whenever I turned 17, that was the first time I ever gotten involved with a political campaign. I'm sorry, I think I said 16. I'm at 17.
But you mentioned you were interested since earlier. You told me since grade school you got interested, but now you became involved in high school at this point, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
So it was towards the end of my senior year. I was about to graduate. And
What high school did you go to again?
Paxson.
Paxson? Okay.
Yeah. And there was a mayor's race that I decided I want to get involved with, so I jumped on board. It was a third candidate in the race who stood no shot, but I thought he was talking about the right things, and he was the only one out of the three that would actively say, like, yeah, I'd pass an HR that expands to sexual orientation and gender identity.
And what was his name?
Bill Bishop.
Bill. Oh, I remember Bill Bishop.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember his campaign.
So I was part of that mayor's run for him. That did not pan out, but that did not really stop me. I ended up going on to help out with some issues-based stuff over the summer. And just before I'd go off to boot camp, I started volunteering with the Bernie Sanders campaign. And then I go to boot camp and go to my A school up in Great Lakes, Illinois during the 2016 presidential cycle. And by the time I got back, we'd already decided Hillary Clinton was the Democratic nominee for president. So I started helping out with her race. And then once that cycle wrapped up, there wasn't really anything going on that I knew of because I was too young in the campaigning world to really know any different. So I'd go on in 2018 to get hired on to be a regional field consultant for a PAC, where I bounced between a bunch of different races and rapidly developed my understanding of field strategy and what that meant and what that looked like. And getting the chance to see so many campaigns in so many areas, it gave me an opportunity to see like how all these different internal structures functioned and worked.
Any particular mentors help you out with that process?
Yeah, I mean, Jimmy was kind of one of those folks. He and I were able to work together in that cycle. He and I had met just after my senior year at a Jack's Young Dems meeting. And I run up to him because he had just left active duty and I was just about to go to boot camp. And I was like, you're a Democrat in the Navy. I'm a Democrat about to join the Navy. We should be friends. And he's like, well, I'd get you a beer, but clearly you're too young. And I'm like, yeah, but there's a cigar lounge about 3 blocks that way. And so like Jimmy was one of those folks. I think being able to work with Jake Flaherty on a woman who was running for state Senate, Kaiser Enneking, I was able to work alongside him. He was an excellent guy to work alongside. And getting to see what like the Cadillac of a Democratic campaign in Gary Farmer's state Senate race in 2018 looked like. That was a great experience. So like I'd go on from 2018, 2019 was the first time Jimmy ran for city council. I was on that race too. I was just his field director that time, not his campaign manager. And what I figured out by the end of that cycle is as much as I had learned over 2018, I hadn't quite learned enough. Because in retrospect, I can look at what I was deciding was our strategy and realized how bad it was. It wasn't terrible, certainly not for the first time ever being a field director, but I definitely saw where my fatal flaws were. So 2020 comes around, I get hired again to go be the deputy statewide director for a consulting firm. I'm bouncing between races from Jacksonville down to the Keys, consulting on a boatload of different stuff and getting to work with a lot more of the external structure of the campaign world versus just the internals of any individual race. Yeah, go for it.
What's the difference in
Internal and
field? No, that's the second question. Yes, field manager and campaign manager, or field
Director.
Field director, and campaign manager.
Yeah, so the field director, their whole job and function, depending on what campaign you're looking at, but in any campaign I'm a part of, the field director's entire function is that voter outreach effort. All those text messages you get, the phone calls, the people knocking on your door if they're doing their job well. It's how do we reach people and how do I get my message in front of their face? Now they should be collaborating with their communications director, whose whole job is to like build up the graphics, and maybe they also do the mail. In any campaign I run, the field director is going to have a heavy hand in like mail campaigns or advertising efforts, because I want them to have a direct stake in like how they communicate with people. But their whole job is, how do I reach out to somebody? How do I get in front of their face? And especially in ones that I'm involved with, how many doors can I knock and how can I ensure that the doors that I'm knocking are effective?
But you work tightly with the campaign manager, because
the campaign manager is top dog.
Right, but so she sends the directive down, like what, right? And you
they organize a lot of the language to keep the language cohesive.
Who
to
they?
make sure,
Campaign
manager. They'll be the ones to make final decisions on the exact terms that'll be used to make sure the message stays cohesive, right?
Yeah, so a lot of the nitty gritty on the field side of things is going to be things like finding volunteers, training staff, whenever they go to knock doors, and making sure that people have a good, clean idea on like how to go execute the mission. The campaign manager is the one who's like creating all the tools and deciding the language, determining the strategy overall, and like verifying that somebody's idea for implementation matches what it is that we're trying to accomplish.
At which level do they introduce you to Stephen Colbert?
The candidate usually. The campaign manager usually gets cast to the side. It's a lot less glamorous on that side. But yeah, in 21, after we wrapped up the 2020 cycles, whenever I went to go work in the state Senate, I'd go on deployment in March of 22. And by the time I came back, my boss had lost re-election. And Jimmy had already called me while I was out in Guam and saying, "Hey, buddy, it's time to run again." I said, "Oh, shit, okay. I have a job." And by the time I got home, I no longer had a job. So I said, "All right, I guess I'm there." And we were able to rock and roll.
So that was 2021?
That would have been the end of 22. So almost a year, more than a year ago at this point, is whenever everything was like said and done. I'm on the race. I'll be your manager.
Okay.
Let's go win this thing. And of course, at the time we were dealing with a whole bunch of other weird stuff in Jacksonville as far as redistricting went, because nothing really made sense as far as the redistricting process fell through. So I think it was today in particular, I think my Facebook feed popped it up today or yesterday. We finally got the map back for what our district was, and we'd already been running for 5 months at that point. So we finally actually knew how to build our strategy out, because that was the hardest part coming into the race, is that I could design a strategy all day long, but I didn't know how it was going to be, because there was one map that came down that split Riverside and Avondale into 2 separate council districts. There was one side that had me fighting less of a Democratic stronghold district and more of a toss-up district, which are 2 completely different strategies. And the map that finally got decided on set us in a solidly Democratic seat, which incorporated both very rich conservative neighborhoods and very poor liberal neighborhoods, and very rich liberal neighborhoods and very poor conservative areas. Like, it had all this like very odd hodgepodge of people that I was so excited to be able to get out in front of and like figure out how to message to these folks that Jimmy Peluso was the right pick to be the council member.
Right. So you're a strategist by, let's say, your, I guess, mindset.
Yeah, that's usually the best way to describe it. lots of lining up dominoes and making sure they fall into place the way they're supposed to.
I like that. Lining up dominoes and making sure they fall.
Yeah, I like the concept, and I'm glad that you're doing it to a good purpose. To be honest, it's philosophically, conceptually difficult. I find the laborious nature of democracy in general to be difficult for society to bear.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not suggesting an alternative. I don't have one, and I love living here. So I don't want to act as if I'm not for, what we have. And that's one of the reasons why I was interested in having more conversations on this topic, because I've become more interested politically as the political landscape has become more diverse.
Mm-hmm.
I am interested, however, in people coming together. And I like the nuance that I think will inevitably come as a backlash to an overly polarized system.
Yeah, so I tend to be of the same variety as you. I certainly have my own personal leanings, but at the end of the day, if we've designed a governmental structure that's designed to be a representative democracy, we have to acknowledge that inside of a representative democracy, we're going to get diametrically opposed viewpoints, and that doesn't change the fact that we still have to continue to make progress and provide for the people that exist. Mm-hmm. I think Jacksonville showed a really interesting pattern in this regard with the election of Donna Deegan as mayor, because you did see a lot of cross-party voting whenever she got elected. For what reasons? I don't really know. I have my reasons for voting for her. But why somebody who theoretically wouldn't otherwise vote for her decided that they were going to cross party lines to go do so, the reasons are on them. Was it because of negative advertising? Was it because they liked her message? Did they think that the other candidate just was too close to what they'd already been seeing and they weren't happy? Like, there's no saying why they did. But the thing that I do with any campaign that I've been a part of that for me has proven to make a difference is knocking on doors. That is my bread and butter all the way through. And anytime anybody asks my secret, I just tell them it's knocking on doors, because at the end of the day, human connection is what helps to break down those barriers, right?
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's no different than chatting with somebody in a bar over a cup of coffee or whatever the case might be. I've quite legitimately knocked on thousands upon thousands of doors in the nearly 10 years that I've been in campaigns. And out of the thousands upon thousands of doors, I can maybe count on two hands how many like actually bad experiences I've had. Plenty of doors shut in my face, plenty of people like kind of casting me aside, but actually bad experiences, I really haven't had that many. It's because when you're staring somebody in their face as they try to tell you about something that they truly believe in, it's really hard to look at somebody and say like, no, you're a terrible person. Get out of my driveway. And I think that by opening those doors, and like I said, in my case, the knocking on doors makes a huge difference. I think by bringing something to somebody's household, like there's almost this instantaneous recognition that you are clearly outside of your depth because you came to my abode to talk to me about this thing that most people don't want to talk to anybody about. Like, it's a weird thing to do, and yet it's this tale as old as Aaron Burr at this point.
But it's more compelling because you bring a story that's also part of your personal story.
Right.
You're not going door to door to tell people they should worry about the national debt. You're going door to door because the federal government is imposing on people's personal lives.
Right. Or, in Jimmy's case, it was, part of our campaign was parks. We want to make sure parks were taken care of. And when you go to Riverside and Avondale residents and you say, we want to make sure our parks are maintained. Well, Riverside and Avondale's parks look pretty good. But if you go to the East Side or College Gardens, their parks don't look like Riverside and Avondale's parks. So if I was talking to somebody in Riverside and Avondale, and I had mentioned that like I was raised in Arlington, we didn't have the same kind of parks that we have in Riverside and Avondale that we did in Arlington. Riverside and Avondale residents might recognize like, oh, we want to make sure that parks like this are available for everybody else. But when I could go to somebody in College Gardens, which is a predominantly Black neighborhood, and like I'm a white guy knocking on their door, right? Like there's an immediate barrier there. But as soon as I say like, we're trying to make sure that parks get cleaned up and are taken care of, as soon as I have that ability to connect with them from the perspective of, oh, I'm from Arlington, I wasn't a part of the side of town that was taken care of. There's a recognition there that builds that bond in a moment. And even if it is a moment, it is a much more impactful moment than a random text message just saying, hey, go vote.
We found out that he grew up near the same area, Harrow Road in Arlington, where I did. Yeah, it's I would say kind of an inglorious part of Arlington, but it has a lot of really cool people. I know that, our high school was full of super powered people in one direction or another. They seemed like they were all good or evil. There was nobody in between.
I have a question.
Leanza Cornett.
It's very interesting, especially that determination that you sustained within such a long time. And as you said, like knocking on thousands and thousands of doors. So it requires a lot of courage, and pretty amazing, like emotional stamina.
Because you got to handle a lot of no's. I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. I used to go door to door also. And I know that you got to go through a lot of a lot of no's and a lot of people that just don't want to think about it before you get somebody who's like, yeah, let me talk about something I'm really passionate. So what drove you? What was your passion?
Why did you just do my question?
Oh, sorry.
Was that your question?
Yeah.
Well, what is the actual, if you like peel all the layers, and you go to your base, your true motivation or driving force so what would it be?
At the end of the day, when I think about government, right, I believe government can be an incredible force of good if it is properly engaged, right?
Properly engaged.
Right.
Okay.
Especially in a democratic system like what we have. But a democratic system is easily co-opted if the citizenry is not actively engaged in the process. If we allow the citizenry to stay unengaged or just to follow a pattern or whatever the case might be.
The weight of the silent majority is what you're talking about.
Yeah, basically. It's if we don't take the time to actively get people engaged with the conversation, actively get people engaged with the race, and especially at the more local levels, because federal stuff is fine and dandy, but it's such a high level of policy that it's really hard to talk to somebody about why a 30-cent subsidy on wheat for a farmer in Idaho impacts a person who lives in San Marco, Jacksonville, Florida, Now it does, but that's a really hard thing to connect with in 30 seconds. But whenever I talk to somebody about a pothole or somebody who wants to run for council who has a 30-cent tax fix on every beer sold at the stadium so that we can fund a pothole fund, that's something that they can see and tangibly notice over time. And giving people that opportunity to engage with in a moment what this process is, what they can do with their vote to be able to engage it, and how engaging with it at all actually impacts the systems that at the end of the day govern us. I think there's been a long standing feeling of disenfranchisement from our democratic systems. And this piece of the system, the campaign side of things, as nasty and wretched as it can be at times, is the mechanism that exists to be able to engage citizens into the process. And if taken seriously and with the gravitas that it deserves, it can be a really effective way to get people to start figuring out like, oh, this is the impact I can have.
So is it correct to say that at the bottom, at the very base, it's your innate desire and need to help people, serve people, make their life better? Or like what drives
Is it your ride to the Navy?
I think it would best be said that my desire is for people to understand how impactful they can be in a system that they don't think they have a impact in. It's no different than whenever I was working in the Senate, right? Like Florida Senate, mind you, not federal Senate. But the amount of times that there would be an email sent to our bulk mail, because I was the one who handled our bulk mail. And I was able to create bunches of rules to filter out like the automatic emails that got filtered into little files. So I kept account of how many people were for or against something. So I didn't ignore those emails. I just didn't read the specifics of them because I'd read one and say, okay, I get the gist. I need to filter this out for yeses and nos. But the ones that were specific, that were fresh and did not look like a copy and paste, I would read them, and whether or not I'd respond to every given thing where somebody was asking an opinion, I at least was looking at this as a staffer to the senator herself, and it would stick, and I would go home with it, and I would think about it, and I would have to come up with my own answers for how do I feel about that email that we got, and how would the senator interact with this if this was something that we had to interact with at all. How would I approach it if she asked me about this particular policy? And it's this weird thing that I've been so fortunate to be a part of, because I do not come from a background that should have allowed me to have engaged with the system in the way that I have. But being able to be on the other side of it, the gross underbelly of the political system, people have no idea how easy it is for them to be involved with it and to impact it. And it's so easy to get caught up in the rhythm of the time where it feels so overwhelming and dark and depressing, when in reality, like, there is so much more that can be done that's just not done because people don't think it's worth doing.
Still trying to get to that base.
Empowering people, really.
But I think she means the part that's personal to you.
Right, but is it because you
which
felt
part
like,
attaches to you?
Right. Is it because
the
you like
most?
felt a certain amount of injustice,
What
a certain
issues did you
amount
want
of
to
like
fix first?
deafness, in people grown up, that you wanted to kind of break that spell, and that's the avenue you chose to do that because it maybe resonated the most with you?
For me, I think what got me to engage it in the first place was this recognition that there was this massive tool that could be used for good that just wasn't being done.
I like that.
Do you
so
want to tell
much.
us what you hoped it would do? What was your first issue that you really wanted to tackle to rally the troops behind?
So I said, like, the first time I'd ever engaged with the machine was whenever I was in 6th grade. So growing up in Arlington, but then going to JWJ and then to Paxson, I would travel through the heart of Jacksonville on a daily basis. And what I would see consistently was all of these broken down old houses that were just kind of standing up. And it's funny now that I work for a historic preservation nonprofit. It's like this horrible thing for me to say that, like, I emailed the mayor and said, why do we have all these broken down old buildings when we could be tearing them down?
You're in the
and putting up
6th grade, you say?
Well, now I work for a historic preservation nonprofit, and we're talking about driving through downtown. So,
Okay, yeah.
like, they're buildings that now I understand, like, oh, there's probably some significance to these buildings that, like, if we could restore them, they'd be really cool buildings for us to use. But in 6th grade, I was like, they're just a bunch of broken down buildings. Let's tear them down and put up parks. And it was probably one of his staffers, but I got a response from the mayor, and that was kind of the first thing that clicked in for me, where I was like, wait, I got a response?
It works.
Somebody will answer? And after that, I guess it was off to the races.
I love that.
So you felt that engagement, and it began a dialogue with you and government.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a random off kilter, and it was like, I can't remember where I found it the other day. It either was a screenshot or a print off or something like that, but somewhere I'd found the email, and I'd included like a clip art diagram about how, like, people breathe out CO2 and trees breathe in CO2 and they breathe out oxygen and we breathe in oxygen. And it's this nice clean cycle. And it was on this like atrocious Yahoo Mail background that had like cartoon stuff on it. It was so unprofessional and exactly what you expect from a sixth grader. And yet I still got a response, probably because it looked like a sixth grader sent it.
And it was original.
Yeah. And like I said, it was probably a staffer who sent the response back because I'm not going to kill somebody's dream, but I certainly responded back to a few letters on behalf of the senator while I was in the Senate. But nevertheless,
I think it's fair enough.
I just, you know,
it's like mom's got to act on behalf of Santa sometimes.
Exactly. And it's usually easy stuff that I'm responding with, but at the end of the day, like, I felt that engagement. I felt for a moment, if even, that I had a voice in the process and that somebody heard me for a moment. Because that response email is whenever I learned that Jacksonville actually had the biggest park system in the United States, which was something I did not know.
Oh, I also, I'm learning this now.
Yeah, we have the biggest municipal park
it.
system in the United States. Now, is it the most beautiful or well-maintained? We're working on that. But we have the most park space in the United States.
And that's Jacksonville City, excluding Jack's Beach, right?
Nope. The city of Jacksonville overall, which incorporates all of Duval County.
Okay, okay.
Yep.
That's cool. I like that. Now that I think about this, I think since I was born, I always lived in places with a lot of green territory.
Yeah, I met you in Berlin.
Yes, that's one of them. And like the town where I was born and raised, it was also one of the greenest places. Anyways, it's totally like side note, but I'm like, and now I'm in Jacksonville? I gotta dive into that thought.
You're a park girl.
And it's interesting you say that because, like, you know, as time marches on and I've been involved with the process as I have been, the policy that I've been interested in impacting have changed, right? Where at first it was advancing LGBTQ interests, which is certainly still a part of things that I concern myself with. Now, if you ask me, some of the things that I'm more interested in is making sure that city zoning and planning is done in a way that facilitates proper neighborhood building. And it's interesting you should say that because the neighborhood that we're in now is one of the most like park friendly, local business friendly, walkable, bikeable spaces in the city. Yeah. Like this is like the model neighborhood for our city. But if you go to the neighborhood that we grew up in, our neighborhood was not the same way. And
it's just across the river. I couldn't believe how close it was.
Exactly.
When I was a kid, you know, you don't, especially in a place like Jacksonville, each neighborhood is like its own little city.
Yeah.
And as a kid, you don't think outside of that. I think of my school, my area, the people I know, the people I grew up around. And when I came over to Riverside, I was just, my mind was blown. I was like, oh my goodness, we have this whole little bohemian district.
Right.
At a time, bohemian. I don't think it's very bohemian now, though.
Yeah, I have to admit that I did say when we were coming back from Berlin that it's changed, it's grown a lot. But I'm glad for that because the influx of more people being interested in that lifestyle means more restaurants, more bars. And
it's weird and eclectic and wonderful. I love it for exactly that, right?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And that they keep it local. I like that they just don't sell out, you know.
And you know, that's part of the value of having the nonprofit that they've got that represents the neighborhood.
Did you know that the Burger King just up the road from here, people have asked me before, if it's all local places, why is there a Burger King? Like, because that's where it started.
Yep.
That was the first Burger King.
Okay, so is it like just a urban, like,
I have zero
legend,
proof.
anecdote?
I have zero actual evidence.
So
because Burger King doesn't want that to be.
It was not the original named Burger King location, but it was Instaburger, which was the predecessor to the whole line.
But it was that the original location on King Street? And
it's been torn down and rebuilt.
Yeah.
But it's very much near the same thing in the same property.
On King Street.
That's why but that building's been rebuilt itself several times.
Right, yeah, I mean, it doesn't look like the 50s.
Yeah, it's made out of like plexiglass and plastic. It's obviously not been there for that long. But it's the same spot. It's been, in fact, it was called Burger King because it was on King Street.
Right,
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, it's such a cool little neighborhood, but like kind of to your point,
people who work there don't even know.
No, not at all.
Which is really wild to me.
It's terrible because it's the worst Burger King in town.
It is?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know that.
We don't eat fast food, so I've never.
And I don't blame y'all, but I do love Burger King, and it is the worst one in town.
So even though it's a chain, they still can differ?
Because of it being a franchise, from what I understand, like there is like some QC efforts from the chain perspective, but You know, it's
They
a
don't have a
franchise at the end of the day. So
Yeah, and a manager
see.
runs
How
the shop, huh?
interesting.
Yeah.
Even within a chain, you still can be unique and individual.
Well, even when we send technicians out, we've got different managers, and which lead goes can radically be different.
But I want to go back to parks and my point.
yeah, absolutely.
What's my point? Well, you were saying, like, to your point,
Oh.
before he interrupted you with the Burger King.
Yeah, no, all good. But to your point, like that's exactly the kind of things that can be done with that kind of engagement, right? Like our neighborhood doesn't look like our neighborhood because the city of Jacksonville just decided like, okay, well, Riverside and Avondale gets to be the ideal neighborhood. That's not how it happened.
Yeah.
It's because Richard Cirillo, Wayne Wood, Jim Webb
Yep.
put their nose to the grind and dug in and made it that way.
Exactly. You know, whenever RAP was formed back in
Michaels.
1974, you know, it's almost been 50 years since that organization was founded.
Yes, next year.
Yeah. But back whenever it was formed, like they were tearing down massive historic homes left and right, and which were of exceptional scarcity in 74 because of the great fire that happened in Jacksonville in 1901, which burned down most of our urban core. So the fact that they were going through and just tearing down these old homes, we were like ripping apart our historic foundation in one of the most historic neighborhoods in the city. So alongside that, there was also the intended construction of a highway system that would have gone down effectively with St. John's Avenue right now. I believe that's where it was supposed to go, which would have cut off a lot of the neighborhood's access to the riverfront and continue to tear down
Hell
more
wouldn't
houses.
even be at all what it
Why
is
would they
today.
even
Exactly.
do that?
Yeah,
They
exactly.
would just kill everything east of the river.
Precisely. It was going to be a chokehold to the neighborhood and all in favor of rapid development without really due regard to what it would mean to the neighborhood. But it took having that citizenry that could engage. And, you know, certainly they engaged in the voting process, but they also engaged by like actively talking to the city government, like demanding that their neighborhood be protected, that we look at these homes and that we find better ways to develop if we're going to develop at all. And then gone on to find or to get us a historic boundary, a historic overlay on the neighborhood, which protected us from the city planning perspective. And then later on, we'd get onto the national list of
Was that in
historic.
the 80s?
I
was
want to say
designated?
late 70s is when we got the city's recognition. And then I think it was the 80s whenever we got the national recognition of a historic place. Because we're on the historic register as a historic neighborhood. But those kinds of things only happened because there was a small group of people who decided enough is enough.
Right.
You know, Ben Franklin, I think, is the one who said, like, don't doubt that a small group of people can make enormous change. Indeed, it's the only thing that has. I think it's Ben Franklin who said that. I might not have quoted that directly, but it is true at the end of the day, right?
That's right. The majority don't elicit change by the virtue and nature and definition of whom they must be.
Exactly.
Most people want stability.
And the more that you can advocate and prove your proof of concept and try your damnedest to get somebody to look, listen, and perceive what you're perceiving, the more buy-in you can accrue through that organic and natural means, the more sustaining power your particular philosophy has. It's true for a campaign. It's true for protecting a neighborhood. It's true for making a change in the world at all.
So if someone wants to make a change in, let's say, let's not just keep it small, keep it manageable in the city or even in the neighborhood, where should they start as a citizen of as a
Talking with people.
get an interest?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the better place to start would be knowing your facts.
Do
Because
your
if you,
homework, research.
yeah, if you come at something half cocked, like you're never going to be able to
Right.
really sell anybody on what you're thinking about. Now, I'll say talking to people helps you like figure out where the holes in your conversation are. But at least having a good background for yourself so that you understand where you're coming from and doing that deep introspection to begin with, right? Your questions earlier about like why I've gotten into
Right,
campaigning
right.
and whatnot. I've had to ask those questions to myself over 10 years of doing it. Um,
I imagine, right? Because
it's exhausting. It's draining. To your exact point, like there's plenty of no's, there's plenty of hard conversations that happen, there's plenty of uncomfortable ones that happen. But at the end of the day, you have to like reflect on like, why do I keep doing this? Why is this something that I do? You know, you don't spend 10 years doing a thing without having to figure out like, why am I still doing this after so much time? So having that introspection and understanding for yourself why you are pushing forward in this particular thing makes a difference. And I think being brutally honest with yourself is also important, right? It doesn't, if your interest in changing something is just because you want to be rich, then you have to decide for yourself if you're okay with that being your reason. And if it's okay for you, then by all means, keep moving it forward. But if you feel like you are compromising some other value in that process because you want to be rich, you have to find your square on that. But it's doing that background research and then engaging people in the conversation, right? It's kind of an all-encompassing step.
And then once I engage a certain amount of people, it's like, okay, there is some resonance. I create a stir. What would be the formal steps after that to approach, let's say, city council?
It changes depending on what you're trying to do.
Just write a letter, right?
Yeah, I mean,
you can just
some
write
number
letters
of
to the council.
signatures, or it should be in a certain form.
it always changes, right? If you're talking about renaming a road, that could be as simple as talking with your elected representative. In a road's case, it's your council member. If it's
What if we want to make like a cat district? We want to be like put up signs where like you got to watch out. There's a lot of cats here.
Slow down to 5 miles an hour.
I think
because the cats are in this.
I think you'd have to get a cat district defined by law to begin with, which would require a city council person's buy-in.
Perfect. All right. We're working on this.
Design work. You'd have to get enough people advocating for it. You'd have to talk to the committee
Everyone loves
chairs for
cats.
any committee. There's a whole lot of steps that go into it. And I think that's one of the more intimidating steps of government, right? Is that there are a lot of steps. It is a massive system at the end of the day.
But if I don't know, I'm like, I have this idea, I have a positive feedback from my community. I can just write and it's like, hey, what should I do? What can I do? What are the next steps, right, to bring it?
Every legislative staffer is going to kill me for saying this.
I don't want to. I want to see you again.
I can handle the wrath.
We're gonna put them all to work.
I can handle the wrath.
Send them the letters. Let the letters come.
Truly, legislative staffers are the most underutilized resource inside of government. We know how to do things. We understand how to move policy. We understand the processes that policy moves through. I only worked through 2 legislative sessions while I was in the Senate, but it doesn't change the fact that I understand that this bill with this particular context is probably going to go to this, and this committee. And if this happens in this committee, then it'll move forward. But if it doesn't happen, then it'll stay there. But to get it out of this committee, you have to do X, Y, and Z. Legislative staffers are so useful for that. And they are at your disposal. Your representatives, regardless of their political alignment and whether or not they align with you, their staffers are still supposed to help you out as a constituent. And maybe they're not quick to help, but I promise the more you badger, the more you call, the more you show up to the office, the less ability they have to ignore you. And emails and letters are fine, but I'm telling you, just like knocking on a door, showing up to the office goes such a long way. And it might be you're going to have to schedule a time to come in and chat with us. It's not a good day to come in, but they are the right people. And if they're not the right people, there's lots of other activist groups inside of different communities who know what they're doing. Here in Jacksonville with Jasmine, right? Like Jasmine knows what they're doing as far as advocacy work goes. Same thing with Jack's Parks Now, before Riverfront Parks Now became its own thing. Like you've got all these people who already know what they're doing. And they're usually not hard to find on cursory glances, but that's where doing your research makes a difference, because if your interest is in a cat district, then finding people who are interested in animal rights are going to know how to help you get connected with these various people and who the best people are to connect with, because certainly some lawmakers are going to be more receptive to your idea than other lawmakers. Because if I'm somebody... Exactly. Like if I'm a dog person who is more than fine with stray cats getting ran over, And I'm like,
horrible
why-
person.
Exactly. Like, why do I want to make a cat
You're in the
district?
wrong
There's too
district.
many strays already.
If you would like some minty,
Thank you so much.
here, I'll do that.
Much appreciated. But yeah, I mean,
So I realize I'm not the target demographic because I'm that nobody's exactly going after the neurodivergent margin, but but should that be the case, I think it's interesting to me that I'm becoming interested in politics after not being for quite some time. For the reason of seeing my friends are getting to the point where we're old enough now, my friends are getting in office and they're making changes. So I'm interested because I see change happening, and I thought this isn't going to happen. It's going to be more of the same, and these guys got it on lockdown. So I wasn't interested in politics because it didn't ever impact me. And people I knew weren't engaged. It was a whole group of people that I felt like they just ignored whatever I wanted, and I wasn't represented. But that's changing now,
yeah, certainly.
and it's changing because there are new ways in which politics is affecting people's lives, both on the local and as well at the federal level. And I used to say as well that only local politics matters. You can't really affect politics on the federal level, and they don't really impact your life unless you're a billionaire. But that's not true anymore. I mean, now we have things like abortion rights, and in my case, my investments with marijuana companies, they're having problems because of legislative issues. All of these things are having impact on people's lives, and not just my investments, but the people's lives that suffer from having to stockpile money and the risks that they take, and women having to go and get abortions outside of states creates a whole secondary issue. And
Yeah.
And I just think it's not the world that I thought, which was one where the laws were relatively fixed. Some were good, some were bad, but they weren't changing so radically or so quickly. Instead, it's a very dynamic landscape now.
Yeah, it does feel like there's been this snap in the last 15 years of status quo, status quo, status quo. Oh, everything's in chaos. What's going on? And genuinely, not to make me sound like I'm a old man on my porch shaking my cane, but like, I think technology has been a big player in that in a lot of different ways, right? Because you look at it from the perspective of access to information to begin with, right? People have so much more access to information. And this is a personal belief, I don't believe that everybody has the tools necessary to interpret information well enough for themselves. Right.
I agree with that. That's why I find a challenge in democracy, because you're expecting people to rule, but people make mistakes a lot.
Exactly. It's really easy to connect two dots that seemingly correlate when maybe they're not actually connected. That's allowing people to start creating these thoughts and theories without having to deviate outside of their own thoughts. But then you look at the addition of social media, whether it's TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever the case might be. And suddenly, where everybody was really good for a long time at yelling in a bar room, now everybody's been giving a bullhorn where they can broadcast their opinions and messages. And that's as far left or as far right as you want to look on the political spectrum, but it happens in every corner of the internet at this point. It's very easy for everybody to formulate this. And content creators at the end of the day are really good at getting their views by eliciting emotional reactions. And by doing so, you're able to cultivate this conversation that makes people engage in a very personal way, which I think over time has been aggravated. So not only do you have the left screaming at the right for how terrible, awful, horrible people they are, but then you have the right in a moment of power where they're seeing all these folks from the left getting into this reactionary stance where they say, well, if they get a moment of power, they're definitely going to take away everything that we stand and believe in. So we're going to triple down while we have the opportunity so that they can only roll back so much when they get the chance.
Those dog district people.
Yeah, exactly. Like that. This is the equivalent of me knowing you want to create a cat district, so instead making it a dogs only city, so that cats aren't allowed to exist anywhere. So that whenever somebody comes in and replaces me, and says, well, I think that was a ridiculous policy. Let's at least give people the exception to the dog only rule so that there can be a cat district. So now you can have all the cats you want in your specific space. And I think, you know, over time, given this access to massive crowds and unlimited information and people being able to spin their information in ways that, like, I'm not going to say necessarily are incorrect, but perhaps misrepresentative of what the information is actually trying to say. Because you see it a lot where somebody takes like
bias, you mean
3 points.
Heavily
Yeah, exactly.
biased information.
Like they look at 3 points, they don't really consider much else outside of it, and they say this is the way. And on the flip side, it's also been an incredible asset to democracy as well in its own way, right? Because you're able to expose so many more people to this type of content, because you're able to reach such a broader audience. When I ran Jimmy's race earlier this year, social media was a great platform for me to engage with younger crowds, you know, 50 and below, because that's where they're at. They don't have cable TV. I can't send out a broadcast commercial and expect them to get it. And if I send out a piece of mail to their house, they're probably going to throw it away as quickly as they get it.
I like that you consider those 40-year-old youngins.
Listen, I'm holding on to my youth for as long as I can, so I want to keep bumping that up. You know, I'll be 70 and saying, like, the young people who are 90 years and younger. But there's different ways that you have to look at folks. And I think that what has happened, especially in the last 8 years or so, is that with this increased activity of politics within younger crowds, because when I was growing up, the people who were paying attention to politics were 60 plus. It really wasn't many younger people as far as I could tell. I know younger people were in there, but I don't think they were noticing quite as much. But now you've got a Gen Z congressman who got elected. You've got people in their 30s representing us in Congress and the state legislature and now on city council.
Is that because of the orgies?
Yeah, certainly. But I mean, we're creating...
All the gamers wanted me to ask about the orgies.
Gotcha. I never got an invite myself. Don't know how one gets one of those invites. I'm just not cool enough, I suppose.
I'm afraid that if someone like Senator McConnell's there, it could change me forever.
It does feel like one of those things you have to roll the dice on and hope for the best. But I think with the advent of social media and the rise of it, we've been able to engage a whole new crowd because it's been so much easier to engage with, right? Who has the time to look at a newspaper? But I can look at an article really quickly on my Facebook feed. Who has the want to watch CNN all day long when all it is doom and gloom? But this random content creator that I like is able to create this 5-minute video about this weird niche policy that's like a very big impact on me. And especially when you've got an algorithm that feeds you the things that it knows you're already interested in and worried about. Which
has me a point I really was dying to ask. Why are all funny people Democrats? All the comedians, 100% Democrats. The Republicans can't get funny comedians?
Because Democrats just... we don't take life seriously, man. Like, we do, but we don't. Like, the things that are serious are serious. But if it's not that, then it's just funny. We're Republicans, in my opinion, much respect to my Republican friends and colleagues. Like, they find, like, weird things too weird to talk about. So instead they go with, like, old stereotypes and say, like, yeah, it's funny to say, like, women should be in the kitchen making sandwiches. Like, no, it's not. It's weird and gross. Like, women are allowed to be wherever they want to be. And if they want to make a sandwich, that's cool. But they also are allowed to, like, build tech companies and go fight in the front lines if they want to be out there. Like, what is happening? Why is this the stance you want to take?
I think it's interesting that the closest thing we have to an unbiased late show is probably Bill Maher, but he's not unbiased himself either. He's very, very biased. But it's just, I don't think there's really anybody out there. The closest thing you have on the Republican side are these talk show people like Alex Jones and Rush Limbaugh, people that shout things into the camp. No one wants that. That's never going to be humorous or entertaining on any level.
And I'll be, brutally honest. I do my best to consume as much media on either side of the aisle as I can. I like to be a well-informed professional. I just consider it a part of my professional development. Democratic talk shows are so much more funny to me.
Yeah. I just like comedy news, and I recognize it's all heavily Democratic bias.
Truly, and every Republican news feed, talk show, whatever I've looked at, always just looks angry, mad, pissed off. I used to, like, whenever I was a junior in high school and driving around in the wee hours of the morning when I definitely should not have been out and about, it'd be like 1 o'clock in the morning, and it'd be like Dana Bash on the radio just before the UBU, like coast to coast FM. And she'd be like yelling about something for a good 5 minutes and then do a commercial for like Super Beats. Yeah. And like, it would just be this really weird thing.
They should have been able to recruit at least half of the MCU to do some kind of like neo-Republican campaign.
Right.
That would be like hilarious and have cool like effects and stuff. Yeah. I don't know why, then they could go with the whole, still promoting the whole military industrial complex. They could have gotten, because I mean, their agenda could have stayed intact along with Michael Bay. They could have gotten Michael Bay. He's definitely, good at promoting that same agenda. Like instead they go with Alex Jones.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it feeds into, so this is a legitimate thing that I had been proposed a few years ago. A friend of mine had said that he'd seen a study where the way that somebody who self-identifies as a Democrat and somebody who self-identifies as a Republican views different things, problems, and their solutions, it lights up different parts of their brains. Where Democrats tend to light up more for the empathetic side and Republicans tend to light up more on the logical side. And I think there's a way to look at policy and especially questions, and that's where it's the most interesting, is watching legislation get debated before it ever hits the floor. Because that's
we need MRIs, Republican and Democrat MRIs.
I think it's not right. You need a molecular biofeedback.
Like an EKG?
Yeah, some MRI is not going to. I don't think it shows like neuroactivity so much.
I truly have no idea. I am not a medical professional.
It's not relevant.
I'm a social scientist.
But please tell me more about this theory.
Well, I think it plays into the key difference on like how it's viewed, right? I have known lots of Republicans who I consider to be good friends of mine, who are only Republicans because they want their taxes to be low, but they still care that like marijuana is legalized and that LGBTQ people are protected and that women have access to health care. And
that's me to a T. I'm totally not represented. I was registered Republican, but I don't ever vote Republican because I've been not represented whatsoever. The reason I registered that way when I was a teenager, because it was a long time ago, and my view was that government should be small. I just wanted small government generally out of people's lives and not bothering people. So later people were like, oh, well, then you're a libertarian. I'm like, not really, because I'm also not the split the vote guy. I actually want to be able to make proper change.
Right. And there is an element to looking at it where it's funny because I know I've listened to so many strategists yell at people about like using your vote strategically, which there is an element to that I prefer people observe, but the lower down the chain of what you're looking at for campaigns, the less I believe that it's necessary. I'd be perfectly fine getting a libertarian elected onto city council. I guarantee you that if I had a libertarian candidate worth running that I would be willing to put my name to, I could get them elected to city council. I think there's enough of an appetite to do that. I also think there's enough of an appetite to get somebody who's a progressive as a part of like the Progressive Party onto council, or if I want to get somebody who is part of the Constitutionalist Party onto city council, I could get one of those people onto council.
When they get there, do you think they could elicit change, or do you think they would deal with a very polarized situation with no friends?
No, they would do what they could, right? Because that's the other piece to it, right? The Democratic Party that we know now and the Republican Party we know now are different parties than they were when they started. Time changes all things. And
I would run for president if I thought the other Republican people would listen to me and calm down.
Exactly.
But I think I would just be tortured by them. I don't want to go there and have to deal with them.
And you saw that in the state legislature in 2021 and 2022. In the state Senate specifically, there was a state senator by the name of Jeff Brandes. Now, he is certainly as much of a libertarian as the state Senate has seen in a long time. he was one of the few people in the Senate who voted no on Don't Say Gay. And he voted no on a few other things that the Republican legislature was really interested in passing, but he, because of his own values, did not want to pass. And so in 2021, when this had all happened, he was the chair of the something to do with like justice, criminal justice. He was the chair of that committee in 2021. And then in 2022, after he voted down on a bunch of these priority bills for the Republican Party, they took away his chairmanship and said, good luck getting anything passed. And you can watch that. So when he left the legislature following that session, you can look at him now and see how he reacts to what's going on. And it's pretty obvious how it is to be in there as somebody with a differing viewpoint from a majority party, especially in the case like what we have in Tallahassee right now, where that party is in a supermajority. You would think a supermajority gives your party members the ability to like express a few different viewpoints, because now you don't need every single person in your party to line up. But it gets worse, because now it's like, hey, we're going to throw everything we got, especially with some of the hardest policies that we've got, and we're going to make sure that that goes through.
That's a dangerous slope.
It's weird.
That's how you end up with some very, very bad laws. Truly.
It's why Florida's kind of in the situation that we're in right now, where we have some like really weird stuff that is passed that is not making us look like such a fun state to be a part of. Especially.
Yeah, I really wish they'd never picked a fight with Disney.
Yeah, that's a big one.
I'm like, you got to be kidding me. It's the thing that supported this state and has kept us tax-free for so long. And that's the number one thing that has driven business here.
It's huge.
Yeah, and retirement. Like, everybody wants to come to Florida and retire and do some little side business.
Yep. You look at like Don't Say Gay, for example, the amount of trans friends and family
that's right.
I know who are terrified of staying in Florida at this point, because it looks like there is a targeted attack on trans folks inside of our state. And it's riling up hate-filled groups, right? Like, we see neo-Nazis protesting almost every other week in Orlando. We've certainly had our bouts of anti-Semitism here in Jacksonville. We had a Pride event last year that the Proud Boys were out in front of, that were trying to stop it, but the community is resilient in their own ways. There's not a Pride festival or function that happens in any grand scheme where there's not some group out there with a megaphone and signs saying, burn in hell.
It's funny to think, because I thought we conquered all that. I was like, oh, we got it. We won. Everything's good. We got the laws. And it's odd to say because it wasn't directly my personal community, but it was friends, family, loved ones. And as I came, to Riverside, it felt like the logic and and better ideas that this community espoused had basically conquered it. And now I feel like this pendulum swings in some odd directions. That's what's gotten me also interested and involved.
I mean, it's freedoms and rights are protected as long as people are there to protect it, right? When the eye's off the ball and somebody wants to take the ball away, they're going to take it away. You get the right groups with the right hateful messaging together and decide, like, this is what I want to deal with. And they're going to rally their resources to make sure it's done. It's it's no different than the backlash that hit Chick-fil-A several years ago, whenever it was found out that Chick-fil-A was actively helping to fund like conversion therapy and anti-gay legislative groups. The boycott that hit Chick-fil-A, like, it certainly was noticeable. Now they're doing fine now because people seem to have forgotten it. But, you also have the same thing going on with Starbucks right now with there's something to do with the Israel-Palestine conflict going on at the moment that has to do with Starbucks. And
Harvard.
Harvard's another
statements that they made. In the case of Harvard, people refused to condemn the Palestinian attack.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of like stuff like that impacts. We understand as a community that it impacts business. We just don't understand it impacts government too. Whenever we rally up and say, like, "Hey, I don't like this," and it feels like it's impossible to get them to listen. But business is highly responsive because business needs to be. They have a quarterly profit that they have to look at and track and say, okay, this profit is down, this profit's not. They have KPIs to monitor, and they're monitored from a quarterly perspective. Government, outside of their budget, is not monitored from a quarterly perspective. We're monitored from a 4-year cycle.
Yeah, and in a noise-based perspective.
Exactly.
And one person can shout several times if you shout enough.
And if your issue doesn't stay in a news cycle for that entire 4 years, or there is not some way to maintain that voice over the course of 4 years, then you have to figure out a way to make it all about your particular issue for 8 months leading up to an election day.
I was for small government. That issue's off the table. There's not a party for small government nor an option for it anymore. Since the time I was for small government, there have been so many 3-letter agencies created that will never go away, like the TSA, and so many new things that there's no point anymore. And my general premise towards government being, why don't you guys all quit your jobs and go home? Since that can't happen, I am definitely much more interested in making sure that it's representative of the values that we appreciate as a society. And the number one value that I appreciate is the freedom to be able to act like I want to do what I want to do.
Yeah, no, I that is truly where I land on pretty much any issue. I prefer the idea that people have the independent ability to operate of their own volition and accord. Take, for example, living in Riverside and Avondale, right? This is one of my favorite neighborhoods of the city. It's the only neighborhood I ever plan to buy a house in, that kind of thing. At least as far as Jacksonville goes. Maybe I buy a house in other cities, but in Jacksonville, this is the only neighborhood I want to live in. I know that one of the things that people stress about the most living in the Riverside Historic District is trying to do any exterior modifications on their house, because then you have to go through the COA process, you have to get it approved, et cetera, and if you want to do it anyway, it's a lot of extra money and fines and fees and blah 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 blah. Like I get all that, but at the end of the day, this was decided on, this historic overlay was decided on by the residents of the district, and you decided to move into this historic district and absorb what it meant to own a historic home. And
I have an odd different experience. I love it.
I do too.
I found everyone really helpful, and when I would get my certificate of approval, they would directly relay my information generally, and I would get my permits more easily because I'm like, I already have a certificate of appropriateness. Yeah. I found it great.
It's a super easy process, and it doesn't cost people any money as long as they're still within the guidelines.
Yeah, I was surprised there's no charge.
Yeah.
I didn't know there was no charge.
No,
I was expecting a bill at some point, or when do I pay?
And all the guidelines are publicly available. They're not hidden away. They're easy to understand for the most part. Some of them are like very architectural, but like assuming you're doing the work, you know.
And you maintain records of contractors?
Yeah. But like that's something I decided on. But within my district, outside of like my ability to like exterior modify my house, interior modifications are all on me. I can do whatever I want inside. And then whenever I walk out my front door, I have the choice to be able to like walk, bike, take my car. But public transit's a whole different thing in Jacksonville. We don't do that all that well yet. But I've got local businesses. I've got chains that I can get to if I really want to, between Hawkers and Burger King, and not too many other spots, which is wonderful for me, but nevertheless, like it's not that far to get to Target if I needed to. And like, I know that walking out and about, if I'm holding the hand of a woman or I'm holding the hand of a man, I'm not going to get a sideways look in Riverside and Avondale. You know, this is a neighborhood that celebrates the diversity that makes up its fabric. And that's something that's beautiful and stunning and worth celebrating. So when I get legislation that comes across my feeds that in any way, shape, or form restricts somebody's ability to do something for themselves, or provides some kind of new measure that, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this, because the thing that comes to mind for me is some of the attacks that have been happening in public schools that prevent kids from getting further education, because some parents are really upset that their kids also would get that education. But some parents rely on that education being taught. So now it's restricting those parents from doing that when it's easier for you to just take your kid out of the class. But it's not done to prevent their kid from seeing it. It's done to prevent everybody else's kid to see it.
Schools are such a complicated social situation. I don't even comment because I don't have kids. I only mention it's so difficult. And it would freak me out if I did have kids to send them to school.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's one of those things that was like some of the hot button stuff that I was dealing with while I was in the legislature. So it's something that I've like been bearing witness to since the legislation first popped up. And it is like my personal mission is like public education. I love public education. It is what raised me. My college was a public college. My high school, my middle school, and my elementary school were all public education. Like, and if not for the system that I had to educate me growing up, the kid that was born to two junior year dropout high school parents in Arlington would not have been able to make it to where he is today. So that's kind of where it gets my warm and fuzzies.
Well, we're definitely glad that you did. I have so many more questions, but I realize we're out of time.
And it's a kind of beautiful thought and emotion to summarize or to close the discussion. Like,
tell me more.
Like taking coffee, my words out of my mouth. Yes, thank you so much for. I had so many more questions because the topic is vast. We live in the city, of course. There's so much to talk about, and just you having as a person here that we would like also to highlight and talk about as well. And thank you for being open, and sharing some very dear to your heart things. Also, it's a side note, which is loud here. I liked your. I guess it would be gestures, right? Gestures and verbal thought, how you would pair them. I don't know if it was intentional, but when you were talking about the Democrats and the Republicans, that they highlight, like when they in the debate, it's a different part of the brain that's highlighted, that you actually touched the right area anatomically. I mean, you didn't touch it physically, but right, like you indicated. And then, so that was kind of, that's like, because I'm very much like it's the brain and anatomy, and now you're like putting your hand on your heart, talking about educational system.
Well, I mean, the last time you saw me, I was playing a entomologist who really likes cockroaches, so I was very in here. So getting a chance to like actually express myself,
Oh, viewers are going to be so confused. What? We got to talk about this next time.
Yeah, we'll talk about it more next time.
Maybe we'll have Jimmy also, and then it'll be a whole like reunion of the. I forgot the name of the play. Yeah, but it was fun. Yeah.
Austin, you want to leave maybe folks with an idea where they can go to get involved, a website or how?
Anything you want to share?
Anything you want to share?
Jeez. I mean,
no pressure though.
I'm. If you are local to Jacksonville and trying to be a part of the Democratic Party, you can always look up DuvalDems.org. They've got plenty of ways to connect that way. I'm sure the Republican Party has ways to connect too. I just don't know what they are. But
I recommend contacting the Democrats about the Republicans and contact the Republicans about the Democrats.
It's really interesting. See what they have to say.
Yeah.
But more specifically, just getting involved. It's super simple and super easy. You can go to COJ. They just changed their website, Jacksonville.gov, and find city council meetings, any committee meetings, and you can look up the agendas in advance. Tells you what they're into, or just reach out to your council member, your state representative, state senator, congressperson. The first time I ever tried to connect with a
did they have trouble getting Jacksonville.com?
I genuinely have no idea. It is so out of my depth. But
I just wanted to make a joke because I got JacksonvilleIncorporated.com, and
nice.
We've got a lot of those domains.
Nice.
So Jacksonville.gov.
Yes, I'm pretty sure that's correct.
Jacksonville.gov. Yeah.
But reach out to your electeds. It's a fun way.
That's the appropriate name for it.
Yeah.
Austin, thank you so much. Oh, I have a little gift. I always forget. I hope you drink wine.
I do.
Okay, great. Thank you
for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
We look forward to having you back.
Thank you. happy to join.
Yeah, it was fun. I learned so much. I always learn so much from our guests. That's my personal egotistic interest in this podcast.
Fair enough.
Hope everybody has a happy holiday,
Yes.
and hope you enjoy.
That's true.
And we're going to be. Do we have one more before
We have one
go
more on the 27th, yes, and then we take a break.
Who are we interviewing on the 27th?
It's going to be Dr. Dan Leary from Jacksonville Natural Healing Center.
All right. So next week is our last podcast from here in Jacksonville of the year. After that, we may be doing some while we're traveling. We're going to go to Egypt and Rome, and we'll be doing maybe
harass people there.
If we find interesting people there to harass, then we'll do a podcast.
Are we going to find any interesting people there?
But we tend to. It is our habit. So thank you for tuning in. We really appreciate your time today, and I hope you have wonderful holidays. And all my podcasts end with, where's the button to turn this off?
Yes, and we'll walk in front of the camera.
Yeah,
okay.